honored to serve as the Navy League's 52nd National President and to represent our over 30,000 members, Navy League members across the globe. I'm thrilled to be here with you today. I too would like to thank our sponsors and attendees for joining us for this next event. If you'll give me a minute and indulge me for just a second, could I get all of the Navy League members, if you're a current Navy League member, please stand. Thank you, and for all of you that are not standing, join the Navy League. Thank you. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's moderator. Brent Sadler spent 27 years as a nuclear-trained submarine officer and foreign area officer with extensive Asia-Pacific operational and diplomatic experience. Following his Navy career, Brent joined the Heritage Foundation. His focus is on maritime security and the technology shaping our future maritime forces, especially the Navy. He's the author of the recent book, U.S. Naval Power in the 21st Century, and frequent contributor to numerous outlets and news media. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in a warm welcome of retired Captain Brent Sadler.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you all. I'm the lunchtime entertainment, so please enjoy the remains of your lunch. I'm going to do a quick, brief introduction of our speakers, and then I'm going to ask both admirals to join me on the stage here in just a second. A little bit of a precursor, kind of a scene setter about what our discussion will be. As the old saying goes, be thankful that you live in interesting times. And I think one only has to look around the last few weeks, certainly since October 7th, that we are living in some very interesting times. Some might even say chaotic times. And given that dynamic nature of today's world, navies have been instrumental. They will continue to be instrumental because the nature of their mobility and ability to tailor their response has been able to keep our adversaries on edge. But the question really for us today, and the panel that we'll be diving in a little bit more deeply, is can we continue that? What do we need to do to keep doing that? And without further ado, let me introduce our two panelists. Admiral Sandy Winnefeld, no stranger to many in the room. But let me highlight a few aspects of his career that are germane to this discussion today. First, as today's great power competition was unfolding, actually, his last assignment as active duty was the Vice Chairman of the Joint Staff from 2011 to 2015. Prior to this, he served as the Vice Chief of Naval Operations, and he's had command of the United States Northern Command, Northern NORAD, and decorated Tomcat pilot. Since retiring from active duty, the Admiral has remained active, frequently publishing articles that range from mine warfare to carrier operations. He is also a distinguished professor at the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at Georgia Tech, a senior non-resident fellow at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, and he serves on numerous boards, advising many in business to how to deal with this chaotic times that we're in today. Now, my second panelist will bring the operator's perspective, and he is in the midst of this chaos. And that's Admiral James Kilby, a native of Pound Ridge, New York, an '86 graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, commanded at all levels. One of which I would like to highlight is on the USS Monterey on its first and early ballistic missile defense operations. So more to follow on that. But also his role as N9 in looking at shaping and developing the future capabilities of the Navy. But in his current role, as the 43rd Vice Chief of Naval Operations, he is also uniquely placed to take the threats that we see today, looking forward and making sure that our Navy, your Navy, remains ready. Without further ado, gentlemen, would you please join me on the stage? So, Adams, we'll give you a few minutes to provide opening comments. And also for those of you in the audience, we will have a chance to have questions There will be some microphones out in the audience. Please, as we go through, be thinking about what kind of pointed questions that you would like to make, and I will call you out later on after we've gone through a few moderated discussion points. And so, without further ado, I'd like to turn the floor over to you first, Dr. Winnefeld, and provide some prepared comments.
Sure, thank you, Brent. Hope everybody can hear the microphone. If not, I'll yell. First, I want to say what a pleasure it is to me to be on the same stage as my friend Jim Kilby. Having been the executive assistant to a vice chief of naval operations, I know exactly what he's going through every day. And trust me, it's not all roses. It's not that much fun. And having been the vice chairman, I know what it's like to be number 2. So thanks for your great service. And I would use that as a segue into. I have to say that the current crop of senior leaders we have in the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Coast Guard are some of the most impressive group that I've seen yet. These people are dedicated, skilled. They're working in a terribly difficult environment in Washington and in the geopolitics of the world. And we owe them a real debt of thanks. Especially what I like about these guys and gals is that they do the first job of a leader really well, which is facing reality and challenging all the assumptions and teaching their people to challenge all the assumptions. And I would say that in our current situation in maritime services, we have a lot of assumptions we need to be challenging, particularly in the Western Pacific. And I want to talk a little bit about that. And I'll do it in the context of sort of a familiar strategic structure of ends, ways, and means, but also the environment in which we live, which a lot of people tend to overlook. The ends that we have are pretty constant right now. It's, at a high strategic level, it's really survival of our nation, obviously, but protecting the global operating system that our allies, like-minded nations, and ourselves put in place after World War II. Some call it the rules-based international order. I like to call it the global operating system. And that is under threat, and we all know that today. And as part of that, to prevent use of force, coercive action, and a very difficult maritime theater, which is the Western Pacific. So those ends are fairly constant. But we have to remember that when one of those 4 variables, environment, ends, ways, and means, is disturbed, the others have to adjust to maintain balance, or you end up in a much higher risk situation. And if you look at the environment right now, there are 2 things that really stand out to me. One is we have a People's Republic of China that, despite them playing nice with us right now on this roller coaster ride of a relationship that we have clearly stated that they fully intend to take Taiwan back, however they have to do it. And we have to keep that in mind. And over the course of the last 20 years, when we've been doing counterinsurgency and the like, in far-off places like Iraq and Afghanistan, they were not wasting time preparing to do that. And they have developed some very serious capability. I know the Vice Chief is going to talk about some great lessons that we've learned from our experience with the Houthis. We have to remember the Chinese, the Houthis are a high school team compared to the Chinese, which are more likely an NFL team in terms of trying to counter us in the Western Pacific. So that environment has changed. The other thing is that we have had a peek under the nose, or under the tent, of strategic ambiguity with what has happened in Ukraine. And in Ukraine, we chose, with a partner, not an ally, to definitely support pushing back on Russia's grotesque invasion of that sovereign nation. We did it using all elements of national power, diplomacy, economics, information, and military power, but it's important to note that the military power we chose to use was indirect. Not only did we not use U.S. forces striking Russian forces on Russian territory, we're not striking them on Ukrainian territory. Why? Because it's very difficult for any president to reach across and do something like that against a nuclear armed power in a modern age. We have to remember that as we move into the future. So, if the ends are the same and the environment has deteriorated, then ways or means has to account for that, or we end up in a risky situation. So let's look at ways. What are our current ways in the Western Pacific? It's our classic American way of war. Overmatch the enemy, fighting the way we want to fight. And right now, that's working. We are, not only is China not in a position where they would do anything for other reasons, economic reasons, and like 8 things actually that I watch at a given time to see if they're about to go, but our U.S. military, our Marine Corps, our Navy, our Coast Guard, our other services are actively deterring them and doing a good job. And thanks to the efforts of people in this room, getting a little better at it each and every day. But we have to keep in mind that those 2 things in the environment are continuing to nibble away at us. China continues to invest faster than we are in that region in terms of military power. And we have to keep in mind that we aren't certain where strategic ambiguity is going to go. It's entirely possible that we will fight that fight, much like we fight the fight in Ukraine. So what's left? If your ways are deteriorating a little bit also, it's means. And the natural tendency for me, when I was in uniform and others, is to lunge for, I gotta have more and better stuff, which is what people in this room provide. But if you look at reality there, one, look at the budget that we just submitted, a 1% decrease in the top line, which in fact is probably about a 3 or 4% decrease if you look at it. That's well known. So the money's not there. We all are familiar with the challenges that we have in the industrial base of this country, particularly for shipbuilding. Vice Chief has to fight that every single day. Even if we could build the ships that we wanted to build, we would have trouble maintaining them all if we built, a huge number. And then manning has been a challenge for us recently. So it's entirely possible that the means that we want to apply to this problem, if that's our answer, are not going to be there. So we can complain about that, or we can, hope that it's going to get better, but complaining and hope has never been a strategy in my book. And so it's interesting to turn back to ways. And I've stated very clearly that while we still are in this moment when we're deteriorating China successfully, we need to start thinking about the future and perhaps a plan B. And to me, plan B involves, much like Ukraine, a whole-of-nation approach, not just a military-on-military approach, which involves diplomacy, economics, information, and of course the military. And how you apply a military in that context against what I believe is the real center of gravity for China, which is not necessarily their military, it's their leadership. And what they wake up in the morning and fear every day, more than anything else, what any autocratic nation fears, and that's its own people. And if you can leverage that against them using those 4 elements of power and more elements of power as well, then you've got the potential for actually deterring the kind of action that we're trying to deter against the global operating system and against partners like Taiwan and allies like Korea and Japan and Australia and the Western Pacific. How we get at that, we might talk about in a little bit because there's some pretty interesting ideas, but what does that Navy and Marine Corps and Coast Guard look like? How does it train? How is it manned? It's a very, very interesting question we should all be pondering. And I'm grateful we have the leadership in our Navy now who is willing to face reality and challenge those assumptions. Because one of my favorite historians of all time, Liddell Hart, said the only thing harder than getting a new idea into the military mind is getting an old idea out.
Thank you very much, Admiral. Admiral Kilby, over to you first.
Well, it's great to be here today with all of you, and I echo a super honor to sit on the stage with you, Brent, and you, Admiral Winnefeld. A couple things, if you heard the CNO speak a couple times today, she talked about her priorities, which were rolled out in January. They are warfighting, warfighters, and foundation. And I really like the simplicity of that, and there's a lot to that unpack in what Admiral Winnefeld laid out here for us. But first off, Ukraine and the Red Sea. So I think we're going to talk about the Red Sea a little bit. I think there's some opportunity there for us and some things to look at that we've done differently over the past decade to put us in a position where we could have the success that we're having today. And then Ukraine, on the other side, the speed of change there, the innovation of the Ukrainians to use things differently in a different manner, to have results in the Black Sea that I don't think anyone would have predicted, I think are a significant thing for us to talk about today. For me, though, my charge on the Vice Chief is to get after the business of the Navy on behalf of the CNO. And we have a bunch of vehicles that you are associated with perhaps depending on your business, but it's based on a thing called Perform the Plan. And it's looking at our business a little bit more, with a little bit more fidelity than sometimes we have in the past. And we're doing that across the board at these foundational elements we need to get at. One of those things is recruiting. Like understanding what are the elements of recruiter productivity and what we have to do to pull those levers to have a different outcome. So that's squarely in my lane as the vice chief. I also in the move faster category. And CNO talked about the Disruptive Capabilities Office. I hope we get at that in this conversation. But to me, that's a little bit opposed to my life as the N9, where we had this traditional system, warfare barons who owned their mission areas. They were steep and deep in their areas. And the only thing harder for a new idea in the Pentagon was fighting against a program that existed. Because if you're a challenge to my program, you must die as a virtue of that fact, because my program must live. And so shortening that, closing down on that, and tightening up on that loop is what the Disruptive Capabilities Office is all about. And I hope we get to talk about that a little bit also. But innovation, the way we think, do, and act, and creating better problem solvers is an element of Navy culture that I'm trying to influence across 21 communities in our Navy to try to drive down deeply that understanding and that rigor when they approach problem solving. So I think we'll talk about all those elements, but those kind of trends I think are key in improving our readiness, improving our innovation, being better problem solvers, and understanding how our culture is adapting to that. We'll get after America's warfighting Navy. So with that, I think I'm ready for the discussion.
Yes, sir. You're first up. So, okay. Red Sea, and based on your experience, at Command at Sea, and looking at how long the Navy's been operating and pushing back against the Houthis, both the expenditure of munitions, most notably, the Navy seemed to perform pretty well. And I think I'd be interested from your perspective why that was, and more importantly, how we're going to take what we're learning today and double down on what's working and get ready for the next fight.
Okay, a couple of elements there. I need to wind the clock back because it wasn't magic that we got here. We had an introspective moment in the surface community in the 2016-17 timeframe when we had 2 DDGs that were operating not too far from that. And we didn't have our Aegis system set up correctly, specifically the spy radar. So there's a lot of wrong ways to set up the Aegis system. There's a few right ways to do it. And that was shortly after we stood up the Navy Surface and Mine Warfighting Development Center, which was based on the model of what at that time was NSOC that became NAUTIC. And understanding your business, understanding and investing in your lieutenants to become good, excellent tacticians and doctrine writers was an area we went after. So John Wade relieved me as the SMIDIC commander, and he went after this problem, did some analysis, and understood where we're at, and went about teaching how to set up and optimize your system. So credit goes to him and SMIDIC for that. But I really want to pull on this Warfighting Development Center piece, because it's not a warfare center. We have naval surface warfare centers and warfare centers in our aviation domain, which are S&T and readiness generators of scientists and big understanding of how to make our system better. And then we have warfighting development centers, which are initially schools that create these tactical Jedis, I call them, that go out to important billets in our Navy to train and develop doctrine. And they cross-pollinate at a level that they haven't in the past. We've got surface warfare officers that are assigned to FAL Nevada, which used to be just Tomahawkers because it was Strike and SOC, Naval Strike and Air Warfare Center, now is NAUTIC. So we've got all kinds of surface warfare officers stationed there to work across the aviation enterprise, and similarly we've got aviators that are assisting the surface of mine warfighting development centers. So that ecosystem existed, and in fact some of the folks manning those ships in the Red Sea were warfare tactics instructors. If you've seen the video, our force generation system is world class. I know of no other nation that can match us in force generation. And so the ability of Strike Group 4 and 15 that are in training squadrons to adapt training scenarios to challenge our strike groups and ESGs before they go is superb. So now here we are in the Red Sea, and we've created these ships that know how to act and know what to do. A key element, though, is the commander. Vice Admiral Brad Cooper, who finds himself as the 5th Fleet Commander without any strike groups. And he understands immediately that he has to get on the radio every day and talk to those commanders and lift the burden of mystique off them. And he said to them, if you have the shot, you must take it. They don't have to figure out self-defense anymore. They don't have to figure out if they're being attacked. He unburdened them of that, which allowed them to focus on mission execution. So that's an important element too, right commander at the right time. So all this is just transpiring. Carney goes through the Suez Canal, and 18 hours later finds herself in a position where she's got the opportunity to do it, and she does. And the ships have been operating that way consistently. I think it's important to anchor a little bit on Admiral Winnefeld's comment, because the Houthis are not the highest end threat that we are preparing for, which is China. But they are a thinking adversary, and they are advancing their tactics, and they are learning every day, which is what we want to do as well. So those captains and those crews are ready. They have about 10 to 15 seconds to make the decision whether to take a shot. They have to maneuver their shots in amongst, maneuver their ships in amongst merchant traffic to open up their batteries to take a shot, to have the maximum chances of success. So I could not be more happy with their process, the way they're performing out there, Brent. But I don't think it's not magic how we got here. And we should credit that system and that innovation. There's one other piece that's important. You know, reach back used to take us a long time. Back when we had the Aegis, we would pull the ship back in and take tapes off and go conduct data analysis on them, and it would take forever. Now they're doing it nightly. Where something happens, they take those tapes, they send them back. Industry, Lockheed Martin in this case specifically with Smitic, are analyzing those tapes to understand how the Aegis system performed, and then feeding that back to operators so that we're getting almost instantaneous feedback to those crews on how to fight.
So thanks for that, Admiral. But I kind of want to shift it over to training and preparation is only so far and only effective if you've got a full army. And when you go Winchester, you basically either you're going to take a hit, even if it's a JV team shooting at you, or you have to vacate. I'd be interested in your thoughts about how we can mitigate or lengthen the time that our ships, with the current kind of vertical launch systems kind of fixed with the number of missiles they have, what options are out there coming down the pike that might allow us to keep on station longer?
So there are really two layers to the answer there. One is making sure you've got enough missiles in the magazine to begin with. And there are a couple of things there that would be nice. We've got to have a Congress that knows how to pass a budget. Everybody out here is a CFO, right? If your CFO didn't come up with a budget on time, he or she would be gone the next day, right? Just saying. And the other thing is to try to get out of this minimum sustaining rate or temporary pause of weapons buys, which I admit that Bob Work and I failed to master in our time in power in the 2014-2015 timeframe. But you know, the Stinger weapon is a really good example there, where we quit buying it for a while, and then when Ukraine happened, you know, the department turns and says, hey, you know, you got to start building these things really fast again. It's like, well, you know, the grandmothers, literally grandmothers and Tucson people used to put these things together have all gone home. And the little parts that they were manipulating, these little tiny seeker heads, you know, those are all, you know, they're obsolescent now. So instead of telling us, hey, build the same thing but with modern pieces, you know, the answer is, well, let's build an even better Stinger, which now you enter up in this cycle of requirements and competition, acquisition, prototypes, testing, and the whole thing. And 9 years later, you have a new Stinger weapon. We've got to break those cycles. But the other thing is, it's nice to be able to think about having weapons that don't require magazines. And to that, I'm obviously alluding to directed energy. A lot of people sort of lunge for lasers when they think that. And lasers are really nice for in-close things against drones, but power's a problem, cooling's a problem, weather is a problem with lasers. You have to have dwell time, so you can only hit one target at a time. I think more in terms of directed energy of high-powered microwaves, and I'm not talking about the low-power solid-state high-power microwaves, which work against UAVs just fine. I'm talking about ultra-high-power microwaves, often which might require traveling wave speed, that come up with a terawatt of power in a nanosecond, and using a little diesel generator can pump that out every 5 seconds. It really starts to add a layer to your missile defense capability that is very complementary, and the only magazine it requires is a little generator to run it. And if you can combine those two, you actually do have the chance. In an environment where right now, against that varsity threat, it's going to be tough for ourselves to defend our ships out there. You might actually have a chance of flipping the advantage back to the defense if you're able to successfully employ directed energy. I would just say, and I've mentioned this to Vice Chief, don't put it on a DDG, it's going to take a decade to do. Put it on an LCS or a USB tomorrow, and you'll have it.
So I want to press on that a little bit. You know, there's new technologies like hypersonics. How do we train and prepare to make sure that these new capabilities are going to be effective? And is there anything out there that might help the Navy get better at that?
Sure. You know, all of our crews deploying out to Westpac now and actually living out there have never actually seen a hypersonic threat live on their radar, much less having had a chance to shoot at it. So we really do need to develop the capability to at least expose our wonderful aviators and surface warriors to that threat. And one way of doing it recently, Stratolaunch launched the Talon A vehicle, which was their first hypersonic. If it's high subsonic by intention, it'll be hypersonic here this fall. That's reusable. It can land at Vandenberg Air Force Base. It could be deployed out to Western Pacific. And now, before every ship deploys out to Westpac, they can actually see what it's like to try to target a hypersonic cruise missile. I'm working with Admiral Boyle on that. I think it's a really interesting opportunity on the seas.
Oh, thank you for that. I want to come back to you and get a chance to dig a little deeper on the Disruptive Capabilities Office, but we've already touched on the industrial base issue, and that's a mass question. Being able to put out the munitions, the ships, at the speed that they are actually viable, and changing the calculus to take Beijing and Moscow. Can you give us a little bit more detail, maybe even echo back on your experience at N9, tell us how the Disruptive Capabilities Office is going to help Navy break out of this current kind of dynamic that we're in with an industrial competition, a race with the Chinese?
Okay, sure, I'll try to do that. I think I won't get into specifics about what we're working on now, but suffice it to say, my experience on the 9 was there was often an air gap between what the program manager was developing because he or she was working on a model of cost, schedule, performance, deliver capability. Oftentimes training got put aside and potentially not delivered or delivered at the back end. The Disruptive Capabilities Office is meant to look across the whole .LPF spectrum and understand what can be brought to bear quickly, and to put that together in a test environment, test it, and have some confidence in it before we go after it. So I think that's promise. That is different behavior than we're used to doing it. And it's basically capability focused. What can I do? Vice, what is my requirement say? So Task Force 59 allowed Admiral Cooper to put together a bunch of things because he was asset poor. He didn't have any ships, so he had to kludge together this unmanned network of things to produce maritime domain awareness. Jim Aiken took the same model and is replicating that in his AOR, his Fourth Fleet Command. And Admiral Paparo and his successor, his predecessor, Admiral Aquilino, did an integrated battle promise in the Pacific. So using all these things as ways to produce some capability now versus the perfect thing in the future is definitely an area that we haven't lived in before. And as the N9, for directed energy, I focused in the 500 kilowatts to 1 megawatt because I was trying to knock down an anti-ship cruise missile and totally missed the opportunity space of unmanned area vehicles, which we now find ourselves beset behind. So I think having a more expansive look at things, producing a capability quicker, and understanding if that's scalable, is the space that the Disruptive Capabilities Office is supposed to work in. And they answered to the Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research and Development and Acquisition and the Vice Chief. So there's a leadership structure there, which is not a separation of church and state.
Well, before I get to the last phase of this moderated panel, I want to give the warning order out to the audience that if you've got questions, after this next exchange, I'll be looking out there to see where the microphones are and call on the questions from the audience to open it up more broadly. But this last phase of questions, gentlemen, I want to shift to what some are calling a new Cold War that we find ourselves in, which notably with China. But it's not only China. It's not a bipolar world. It's a multipolar world that this new Cold War is playing out in. And I'll start with you, Admiral Kilby. You know, looking at the Chief of Naval Operations, kind of laying out a navigational plan, can you give us a little recap and kind of put in that context, what are the most important elements that we get right today with regards to this new Cold War with China?
I'll try to do that, Brent. First off, I can't ignore today, right? So I have to produce a ready Navy. And if you listen to the CNO talk, she talks about this change of Navy mission, which is not only to be ready to conduct a prompt and sustained operations incident at sea, but also to have a current Navy that can operate in a safe environment to protect the world. So that challenge is ever present, and in her mind, warfighters Foundation has a readiness elements all across those things. So produced the elements I can today. Really get more players on the field, which is not just ships out of maintenance on time or ships out of the building yard on time. It's weapons doing that too. It's getting my recruitment back what I need it to be to have better manned ships, squadrons, and a Navy. So all those elements have to come together at once. And at the same time, I have to get at those foundational things for that more stressful fight. Long-range fire, counter-5C SRT, contested logistics, or internal defense, so I don't have to use my magazine for defense when I want to use it for offense. All those four elements need to come together, and there's an integrated part of that to deliver that capability.
Admiral Winnefeld, your thoughts about where our hand is weakest in this new Cold War and what Navy needs to do better, or thinking it more creatively?
Sure. Two sort of different threads in the answer to that question. If you view a Cold War between nations as a whole nation war, not just a military conflict, much as what's going on with Ukraine, using diplomacy, economics, information, and military, I would say that the weakest element of national power in the U.S., ironically, is the information element. We have the best marketers and advertisers in the world, the best filmmakers in the world. We know how to influence people. Look at the political campaigns that are out there doing all kinds of crazy things. But we really tend not to exercise that on the global stage. The best we really do is to try to project, understandably, a positive view of the role of America in the world, among our allies and the global south and all of that. But we're not very good at defending ourselves against misinformation that's put out there against us. Those are two elements of the defensive side. And on the offensive side, we're really not very good at all about pointing out to the rest of the world the terrible behavior of people like Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping and the like. We're just not very adept at that. And I won't even get into the black world of information operations where, who knows where we are there, right? But that is the weakest element of power. I would say that the one glimmer that we saw during the Ukraine conflict was the fairly skillful release of classified information to really expose what Vladimir Putin's intent and motives and thinking was, which if you talk to any diplomat or senior military official overseas will tell you that made a decisive difference in keeping allies and partners on. So we have shown that we can be good at it, but we have much more work to do on the information side. On the Navy side, and Marine Corps and Coast Guard, really the maritime side. If you think of this as maybe we aren't going to be allowed to go into the hot zone and fight this fight in the hot zone, who knows? Then it turns into more of a Mahanian approach. We all in the Navy worship at the altar of Alfred Thayer Mahan and Julian Corbett, But in fact, Mahan said, you can only really use the Navy to influence events ashore as support of another military force if you have control of that environment. And there's a good chance that we may not have total control of that environment. So it may fall back to the Mahanian thing of protect your own commerce while holding at risk the other guy's commerce. And when you look at what the Chinese leadership fear the most, again, it's their own people. And the element of that they fear the most is their economy. So you may find that you shift to a Navy and Marine Corps that are even more adept at shutting down commerce outside that outside, which doesn't mean a fundamentally different look. Maybe not as big as the Navy and Marine Corps, I can say that in this crowd, but definitely one that is configured slightly differently, trained slightly differently, maybe more really smart offensive minds, maybe non-lethal ways of taking down ships, maybe the great blue-green team becoming even more adept than it already is at taking down ships, things like that. Those are areas where we need to explore. Again, we're successfully deterring now, but as we think about what a new idea would be, we should be considering how we approach that.
Well, thank you. And now please come to the microphone with your questions. On that last thought, though, I did want to give one plug. It's clear there was a speech that the Secretary of the Navy gave at Harvard back in September, and he laid out a concept called maritime statecraft. It seems like that's the beginning of this thinking that you laid out in Winnefeld, to try to think about how are we going to play in this economic as well as a military kind of competition, both in the peacetime but through this spectrum of rivalry that goes up into full-on Connecticut. And it's not clear yet, to me and many others, that we have quite figured out how to actualize or operationalize this. So, but enough with that, enough of me talking. Let me see if we've got questions in the audience.
Right there.
Oh, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Can you hear me?
We're looking for
Yes,
questions.
Atlas, thank you very much. Rick Easton, retired surface warrior. So great discussion, and obviously a lot of things going on. I just wish I had Woody's in my day on active duty. But as we look at the SLOCs we have, the sustainment, I know that ASNRDA has stood up over the last few years, the Wartime Acquisition and Sustainment Office. I think we have a lot of challenges with MSC and MARAD from the point of view of sustaining that logistics fight. What are your concerns? What do you see as the key risks to that? And then the other complicating piece, of course, is the defense industrial base, maritime industrial base, the workforce, to actually produce a lot of those things that we need in order to keep those magazines full.
Well, just a little bit more tactical answer, Rick. I think we need to be much more adept at rearming, refueling, and sustaining our ships at sea. The classic model of I can pull them out of the Red Sea and send them to Suda Bay is not going to work. Admiral Cooper, again, very thoughtful and working on solutions within his own theater. So that's a kind of tactical piece of that. The sustainment piece, I think Admiral Winnefeld got at. Guilty as charged as a former resource sponsor for funding the minimum sustainment rate because I had nowhere else to go, I thought, for funding. But I can't do that anymore, and we've got to look at ways to reinsert our missiles faster and have a magazine that's full that allows me to react more quickly to these events. So there's a whole industrial base beneath that, so many of you are in the room, that supports the generation of those munitions beyond that MSR rate. And that doesn't happen overnight. So we've got to get smarter about that. And I know Jay Stephanie is right here, Erica Plapp, others have been working at that for some time, but it's not going to happen immediately. We did invest a lot of money in the 25 budget in the submarine industrial base, which is to get at those fundamental things to produce ultimately a Columbia submarine and 2.33 Virginia-class submarines in 26. Much to the chagrin of the budget, people wanted to see another submarine in there, but when you've got a cap, we're trying to invest in a meaningful way to have a different outcome. I guess that is my fairly tight answer on that. Sir, do you have any comments? Okay.
Thank you, sir. Next question. I think everyone's like gravitating to this one microphone over here.
Good afternoon. Thank you, sirs, for being here. Mark Fidelli, Chorus. Our software provides program managers with tools to provide insights of various, sort of cost, schedule, performance things. And so when we mention, this is a common concept of the warfare barons or the program managers are so hinged on cost, schedule, performance that it's typical that they're not the sources of innovation. Maybe they're the antibodies. Maybe they're just constrained. So is it that if we press on that, get better, get real, get better. If we look at ways that maybe you pick up the phone and do a conference call, like simple things, like, hey, or is it bringing in external data that they're not looking at to have the risk picture that you see be shared across those programs so that some different kinds of trade-offs can happen, different kind of discussion. And maybe it is the information space. Maybe we're not as good at getting them that information. But really, it's become such a joke almost that we need to maybe press on that question. What can PMs do to accelerate innovation, to leverage what's coming out of DCO? We know the incentives are to not. But in all seriousness, we're at a varsity level of the game. What might be able to be done now that hasn't been able to work in the past? Thank you.
I don't know that there was a question there, but I appreciate the comment. I do think we can do better there, and I do think we can go faster. You know, on the floor between speakers, I was down at the NRL booth where they talked about being able to update the Slick 32 Victor 6 library much faster than we previously had in the past. Great that they got to it before we had taken a hit, but that innovation would be welcome to me in the Pentagon to understand that potential, and opening that conversation broader, I'm all for. Thank you.
We'll go over to the other side over here.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have time for one more question.
Hi, this is Steve Moreno from the Department of the Navy. One of the President's advisors, Juan Vitelli, was in charge of a program called Project Pele, which could put 10 megawatts of power into a shipping container. He also mentioned that we had a nuclear airplane design in the 60s that was only constrained by the weight. And it seems like both of those, all of the obstacles to having a nuclear airplane that could power directed energy solve a lot of our problems. What are the sort of plans? Are there any POM or programs aimed at getting that capability out there within, say, next 10 years?
I know of no plan to produce a nuclear airplane in the United States Navy anyway. I do know that we have, Admiral Gilday started this thing called the navigation plan, and from that we created a thing called the navigation implementation plan framework. Some of those things he got after for us to organize beyond where we lived in our resource sponsorship. Long-range fires requires multiple resource sponsors to work together to consummate that. Counter 5 CSRAP is an area which requires multiple resource sponsors to get at. Terminal defense is an area which could use high-powered microwave, lasers, electronic warfare, and other things to build confidence in the captain to defend the ship, his or her ship, without using an SM-6 or an SM-2 missile. So those founding efforts to kind of transcend those resource sponsors are in effect. I don't know that we got it exactly right, so I welcome any input from you to kind of, or the audience, to make sure we're understanding of what that environment has.
Yeah, I would just add 10 megawatts in a trailer is nice. It's kind of amateur hour, frankly. There's a system that they've been testing called Red Cat. Has been tested out at White Sands. It's getting a terawatt in a container. And I can't get into any detail, but it's pretty darn successful. And this is doable. It's a question of people believing in things you can't see. It doesn't go whoosh. You know, it doesn't go boom. It doesn't have a nice, cute laser going out. It's just a, you know, and that's hard to believe in. It's a new idea. It's certainly worth a few shekels to go out and try to marinize something like this and see if we can make it work, because it could be very disruptive. And as I said, it won't take the place of kinetic missile defense, whether it's cruise missile or ballistic missile or hypersonics, but it will put a layer on top of that that actually offers the opportunity to flip the advantage, at least temporarily, back to the defense. So we ought to do a full court press on that, in my humble opinion, because no magazine required.
So I have to apologize. I think we've kind of blown the time. The voice from the sky kind of keeping me honest. And again, I'm going to allow both Admiral Winnefeld and Admiral Kilby to give like a very brief kind of anything that we didn't touch on, like a 30-second recap. But again, I also want to thank Navy League for the time for all of us to gather here over lunch. and to have this discussion. I'm extremely honored to be allowed to be on the stage with both of you admins today. But before we part, any final comments first?
The last thing, I don't think we touched on allies and partners. Many of them are here in this room. We should really be focused on that. I know the Indo-Pacific Commander and the Pacific Fleet Commander certainly is over the next couple of years to operate, which is operate with our allies that are from the Yukon AOR, frankly. So welcome that. Develop plans and exercises and drive ourselves to operate more together. In my last job, I did that with the UK in some level of detail, and I think we've got some ways to go there, and I'm bullish on that in addition to everything we discussed. That's it for me. Thank you, Adam.
I just close by saying I think in terms of three sort of horizons of innovation. The first one being sort of incremental technical improvements, but still, supporting our current warfighting concept. And people in this room are absolutely virtuosos at that, and we need to do it, and we do it very well. The second horizon is sort of more disruptive capabilities, but still in support of a current warfighting concept. And those are things like stealth, precision-guided weapons, and those sorts of things. It's the third horizon that we have to be starting to look forward to as we do what we're doing in the first two, and that is rethinking the entire concept. And I want to reiterate that I'm so optimistic about this Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard leadership team that they're actually able and willing to do just that.
Well, thank you again, and I think that concludes our session today. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time, and thank you also, most importantly, the audience and the Navy Legion.
Thank you to Admiral Kilby, Admiral Winnefeld, and Mr. Sadler for their remarks this afternoon.